Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Catholic Education Foundation podcast number 34. The primary focus of today's conversation is to educate Kentucky voters about Amendment number 2, which will appear on the general election ballot coming this November. Our special guest is Dr. Thomas Davis. He's an emergency medicine physician and founder of Commonwealth of Kentucky Educational Opportunities, a grassroots organization that advances public policies and puts Kentucky students first. And as always, Mr. Rich Lecklider, the president of the Catholic Education Foundation. Gentlemen.
Hey, how's it going?
Going fantastic. How are we doing today?
Really good.
To be here.
All right, so gentlemen, we have a lot to talk about today related to the big referendum, that item that's coming to Kentucky voters on November 5th. Before we get to that, though, let's learn a little bit more about Thomas Davis. So, Thomas, tell us about yourself and your family.
Yeah, sure. So, given that we're speaking about school choice today, I want to give a little background on my own educational upbringing and how that's will be pertinent to the conversation today. But as a child, I moved around a lot throughout the United States as growing up, Arizona, Michigan, ultimately landing in Kentucky. Went to a mixture of both public schools and Catholic schools in those states, and even spent a little time out in Mexico as a boy. But ultimately, when I settled here in Kentucky, I'm a graduate of St. Xavier High School, class of 2006.
Okay.
And moved down to Nashville for 11 years, studied engineering, then medicine. But more importantly, it's where I met my wonderful wife. She's an early childhood educator. And we now have 3 beautiful young girls, 6, 3, and 1, and are very much looking forward to expecting our 4th at the end of this calendar year.
Thomas, we got a lot in common here, man. So St. X, I went to Belmont University.
Okay.
So
in Nashville,
yeah, man.
It's an up-and-coming school. They just opened up a medical school, actually.
Belmont's awesome.
Yeah, they're on fire right now. They're doing a lot of really good work at Belmont.
So, Thomas, you're Catholic. You're a Catholic school graduate.
Mm-hmm.
How did that experience impact your life?
I always tell people I didn't go to St. X because of the facilities. You go there today, it's a beautiful school. But when I went there, I ran track. Our track was pretty atrocious. It was a slippery tennis court surface of a track.
Yeah, I remember.
But what made that school special was the people inside of those walls. And that's what brought me to St. X, was the people and those relationships. And it's the life lessons that I learned. I look back to Coach Medley in particular, running track for him and cross country.
Mm-hmm.
I may not remember a lot about his math class, even though I did engineering school, but I remember those life lessons from those 4 years. In particular, it's from the failures and then the resulting success, the effort that he invested in me and helping me, training me to overcome those obstacles. And I think more than anything, developing a very healthy outlook on competition and how I see others around me, and seeing competition not as people I have to beat on the track or on the race course, but as people who push me to be better. And when I learned that life lesson and how I saw my classmates say in medical school that we're all here to be the best doctor and we're all pushing each other to be the best, that was the biggest life lesson. And I think the secondary thing that came from that was, I never worked harder except for my junior year of high school. I mean, even compared to residency, that was the hardest year of my academic career.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm so grateful for that year, because that year was a turning point for me. It's where I learned to love the feeling of hard work. And it's what led to so much success that senior year for us as a team, winning our state championship in cross country, and then also individually winning my individual state championship in the 1600 in track.
Awesome.
It was because of that hard work and that investment from my teachers that invested so much in us as individuals.
Wow.
Amen.
Pretty cool, right?
Amen.
But that was a pretty elegant way to put that, Thomas. That was pretty awesome, because it's really hard to describe what these high school experiences at these Catholic schools actually mean once you've gone through it. But that was a pretty powerful statement there. Okay, let's get to it. So let's start with the basics. I'm not really sure that folks know a whole lot about school choice. So, Thomas, what exactly is it?
I'm going to try to keep this simple, and then we can dig into the weeds about what it may look like. But at the end of the day, school choice is pretty simple. It's the idea that it's your tax dollars, it's your child, and it should be your choice. If you open up the Catholic Catechism, it says parents are the primary educators of children. But this is not even just Catholic. If you look at the United Nations even, they say that parents have a right to decide the kind of education their children receive. This is really a universal principle. Numerous countries across the world have robust school choice programs. Netherlands has this enshrined in their constitution, the idea of school choice. And, states across the United States offer this as well. What we're looking to do is just put the power back in the hands of parents to direct their children's education, to find the school that best fits their kids' needs and reflects their family's values. That's what school choice is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But so, Thomas, you're heavily involved in obviously the school choice arena. But tell us about how that started and how some of the things that you've been able to accomplish through the Commonwealth educational opportunities.
So when I was at Vanderbilt during my undergrad years, I met my wife there. She was an education major, and there was a great speaker named Jeffrey Canada. He's this tall, lanky black man from Harlem, and he started Harlem Children's Zone. And he came to speak at Vanderbilt and spoke about this whatever it takes mentality to create success for inner city kids in New York City. And I just found that attitude of we will not take no for an answer to be so inspiring, to start with children even before they're born, to offer as a charter school, in this case, to offer baby college for parents and work with parents through the pipeline and their kids, all the way to make sure they're having success as young adults and beyond. I loved that idea of we will do whatever it takes. Mm-hmm. So that first turned me on to the concept of school choice. I reflect back on just my own experiences living in different states, going to both public and Catholic schools growing up, how fortunate I was to be able to have that opportunity. And then also just my experiences in Mexico, just seeing that contrast of poverty. And when I moved back to Louisville after my training, I really wanted to get involved in the school choice effort. So often people say, well, school choice already exists in Kentucky. And they're right, because, you can go to private school if you want, but the reality is you can go only if you can afford it.
Correct.
And from a public policy standpoint, school choice is really about creating that level playing field for all children to have that same opportunity.
Right.
So that's how I got into the fight, is wanting to create that same opportunity for other children across the state.
Awesome stuff, man. So obviously your organization is very active in Frankfort, which you have to be. Mm-hmm. Talk about some of your strategies and how they impact public policy there.
Our success as an organization is very much dependent on understanding the psychology of politics, and specifically politicians. And so what I mean by that is, politicians, they inherently, their goal is to get reelected every 4 years or every 2 years.
That's the goal, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So when you understand that, you have to say, well, what drives them? How do they get reelected? And then inherently, for politicians, for most of them, the way they think is, the best way to get reelected is to not make anyone upset at me. Mm-hmm. And the best way to make no one upset at me is to do nothing, or at least to hide. You might, it's surprising to hear that because you watch national television and you see lots of big talk on TV. But what happens all too often is it's a lot of big talk, and then you pass a resolution about it. Well, resolutions don't change anything. And, we as voters are electing officials to positively improve, whether it be our state or our country. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you have to be able to selectively apply pressure to pull some of these politicians out of hiding with candidate surveys, and then informing the public about where their legislators stand on issues. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, we've had tremendous success. We formed in 2020. Mm-hmm. And in 2020, we called out 10 different legislators that were openly opposed to school choice, just to inform the public about where they stood.
Yeah.
Fast forward 4 years later, what we found through our efforts is that every single one of those 10 that we initially just drew some attention to have now either co-sponsored legislation for school choice, voted for school choice, or removed from office.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, Rich, this has been pretty awesome to this point, but school choice is right up your alley.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about the foundation's role in the school choice world.
Yeah, so we've been, I guess in Kentucky, we've probably been working on school choice for 3 decades. Okay, it goes back into the 90s when we sort of started this journey. And it's, had its stops and starts. And at the foundation in 1999, we started granting scholarships to kids who couldn't afford to go to any of our Catholic elementary schools. And we started that year with $110,000 and 220 kids. But that was the first step we made into what was, in fact, school choice for Catholic schools.
Right.
So we got in the school choice business in '99. Fast forward 25 years, and we're up to 3,700 kids, $8 million of funding, both records, and probably going higher this fall as well. And again, it's not about the school, it's about the family. It's very family-centric. So if that family wants to go to a St. Rita school, St. Stephen Martyr, St. Paul and Dixie Highway, wherever, and can't afford its full cost, somebody's got to be there to fill that gap.
Sure.
Otherwise, they don't go.
Yep.
Otherwise, they don't
Sure.
go. And we're the organization, through our donors entirely, we're the organization that can do that with donor money. It's not financed by any kind of state or federal funding. And, we've been able to provide that opportunity to thousands of kids, and we want to continue to do that. What we're talking about here today is sort of a modified version of that, right? So somebody can call our office today and say, gosh, my second grader's not doing well at XYZ. I want him to go to, St. Agnes on Newburgh Road, as an example. And our job is to connect them with the school, make sure it sort of fits for them, and if they need help, give them an answer that they need in order to finance that education for that kid and do it quick.
Right.
So what Thomas is talking about, we'll talk about some more, is a program, a statewide program that's sort of it's sort of in the making, about how do we give families that same choice in the education of their children across the Commonwealth. And as Thomas will talk about later, we're actually one of the few states that don't have school choice if you look across the country. So,
right.
But we've been able to do this for 25 years, again, thanks to our donors. This would be a huge expansion of school choice, not only for Catholic schools, but for any non-public school.
Okay, so come November 5th, when you go to vote, there will be a referendum on the ballot. Rich, exactly what are Kentucky voters going to consider with respect to Amendment Number 2?
Yeah, this is a formal amendment of our Constitution.
Okay.
The state of Kentucky has its own Constitution, and there are certain sections in the Constitution that don't allow for school choice funding. They don't allow public monies to be distributed to non-public schools.
Got it.
So for many years, we tried to sort of legislate around that in Kentucky, but every time something passed, it got struck down around this provision in the Constitution. So the only way to advance the ball here was for the legislature to take it to the voters to change the Constitution. Now, by voting yes on November 5th, you're not voting for a school choice program. You're voting to amend the Constitution to allow legislation that would provide school choice.
I want to chime in real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So school choice already exists from a programmatic standpoint in Kentucky in the early years in pre-K. It already exists in the collegiate years, whether it be through Keys money, whether it be through the GI Bill, through Pell Grants. So really the idea of allowing students to choose their school is already well ingrained in the American culture, even in Kentucky, the Kentuckian culture. But there's an exception in those middle years, K through 12.
Yep.
We need to ask ourselves why that's an exception and why not let it be uniform throughout a child's academic career. Because if you support the idea of a GI Bill or the Pell Grants, then you support school choice, and you support the idea of letting parents and children be in charge of directing their education. That's what this question's all about.
Rich, you mentioned that this fight's been going on since the 90s. And Thomas, obviously this is a constitutional issue, as you guys just alluded to. What's been the opposition? Why are we fighting against this? What's the opposition to such a program?
I think the biggest opposition is the teachers union, to be quite honest. There's a lot of money in education. Teachers unions, not teachers, my My wife's a teacher. Teachers have they fought through COVID very hard. But I think teachers unions, to be quite frank, objective is that they held children hostage for multiple billion-dollar ransom payments across the country. They're the ones that are most opposed to school choice. But if you actually poll teachers, 50% of teachers plus support the idea of school choice because, in fact, most teachers, or a lot of teachers in public school system, say here in Jefferson County, send their kids to private schools. They want to have that choice.
Right.
This is, a neutral idea in terms of which school you send your kid to. You can choose whichever school you want, but the goal is to give parents more choice. If we believe, choice is a good thing, the more we can maximize choice for families, the better it is for our children.
Yeah, and I think what Thomas said earlier about the pre-K and college systems, and there's this thing in the middle. It's political, okay? It's sort of why we haven't made the progress we should have is mostly around politics, to be honest. And there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen on that one. But I would think, and I think Thomas is spot on. There is already a culture around school choice in Kentucky. It's sitting right in front of us. We're just sort of ignoring it on the edges, and because we're so involved with this amendment in K through 12 education and the lack of choice that we have there. And I think that's fundamentally, I don't think a lot of voters really understand that, to be honest.
But guys, so listen, I'm trying to kind of understand the facts here as somebody that's not deeply ingrained in this. Does the school choice, if this goes through, does this affect public schools in a negative way?
So if you look at the data, actually, if you believe in free markets, the competitive effect of choice, this improves not just the outcomes of students who choose to go into a private school, but if you look at the studies that have analyzed the effects of students who choose to remain in public schools, they do better. So specifically, there have been 28 studies that have looked at the effects of children who remain in public school. Of those 28 studies, the test scores improved in 25 of those 28 studies. And in one study, there was a neutral effect, and two, there was a negative effect. But the overwhelming evidence points towards improvement in educational outcomes, not just for students who take advantage of school choice, but also those who remain. And that's, I think, attributable to the fact that everyone's more focused when there's competition.
Oh, absolutely. Look, in business, in anything in life, competition makes you better. It always does, and it always will. And I use the word accountability along with competition because in education you have to have both. And I think the level, one of the studies I've seen, I think it was in Florida, the level, it was clear that the level of accountability across the system went up. Not just in private schools, not just in public schools. Sort of everybody won.
Everybody wins.
Everybody won.
What you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of cherry picking data too. I mean, as an emergency medicine physician, I read a lot of literature. I have to integrate the literature and realize that not every study is positive or negative, but you take that you take all of the body of literature that exists to form your opinions in making medical decisions for patients. Similarly, when it comes to public policy, you might find one study that shows a negative effect, but when 25 of your 28 studies show a positive effect on educational attainment for children, that's worth something. We have to realize that we can't cherry pick data here.
So, Thomas, how many other states already have some form of school choice program?
So, surprisingly, Kentucky is one of only 2 states that does not offer any form of school choice. So, that's us and North Dakota. Every other state across the country offers school choice, and then they've figured out that this works. And, I think a great example is the state of Florida. Florida 20 years ago, when they started offering school choice, they were a very mediocre state when it came to educational success and metrics. Fast forward 20 years later, Florida now has the top-rated education system in the country. They also have the biggest school choice program in the country. So this idea, again, that school choice harms public schools is hogwash because they've been able to show that you can do both and do both very well. And it's, it improves the outcomes of kids all across the state. We need to emulate and learn from those experiences of other states that have been so successful, and it's about time to bring that success to Kentucky.
Yeah, really, what you want is it's sort of the same thing we do at the foundation. Everybody wins. The kids that can afford to go to a Catholic school can attend. The kid that can't afford to go can attend as well, and they can sit next to each other in the same classroom. Everybody wins, and I think this sort of winning mentality should spread over to private and public schools. Everybody can win.
Let's talk about a few of the financial facts here, Rich. So let's provide our listeners with some information on the cost of educating our children here in Jefferson County, both in public schools and Catholic schools.
Yeah, the data is sort of interesting, and it's available on JCBS website. But in essence, and this is for Jefferson County, it's about 100,000 students.
Okay.
Are in JCPS K through 12. That's the universe we're talking about here. Elementary, middle, and high school.
Got it.
And there's the Catholic school system, which is pretty large in the county. There's about 19,000 kids in 39 elementary schools and 9 high schools. So pretty good school district, if you will, by itself. So if you look at the cost, how much funding is available to educate kids, it's actually quite large. For example, in Jefferson County, and this will vary by county, but Jefferson's the biggest, and the average funding, this is not cost, this is funds available to educate a child, is $23,500 per student, K through 12, per student. That is a big number, okay? Now drop back for a minute and say, okay, that's interesting. What about on the private side? What's that funding that drives that system, if you will? And if you look at, again, let's pull the Catholic system out for a second. 39 elementary schools, 9 high schools, 19,000 kids. The average revenue that comes into that system to teach each one of those kids is $8,300.
Big difference.
It's a third. Now, that's not a blast on anything. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's very interesting that, and by the way, our taxpayers are we're all paying for the public school system. All three of us and everybody else is paying for that. The big driver of that funding is property taxes, and there's also the employment tax, the local and occupational tax. Those are the big sources of revenue.
Okay.
And here's something else that I think is really interesting, and this goes to the next sort of argument that you hear about why school choice is a bad thing. And the argument you hear is, well, if you move some kids out of public schools and they go to non-public schools, the funding gets depleted.
In the public school arena.
From the public school. It's a depletion of revenue.
Correct, right.
Let's look at the facts for a minute, okay? The facts are this. Of that $23,500 per student in funding, that comes from different sources. It's federal funding, local property taxes, there's some state money. There's multiple sources of that revenue, okay? If a kid is in Atherton High School, just as an example, and says, I'm going to go to Assumption, okay? I want to move, okay? That $23,500 of funding gets reduced by $2,700, 12%. The only loss to Atherton High School is $2,700 if that kid leaves that school. The other 88% is available to use in that system however they want to use it. So if you think about the math for a minute, the loss is sort of minuscule, but the amount of revenue available for all the other kids goes up. In other words, the average revenue in Atherton with one less kid, the rest of the kids on average, their funding is higher, not lower. So by losing one kid, but only 12% of the revenue for that kid, they keep 88% in the pot, that gets spread to all the other students that remain in the building. They benefit, but at least financially. So when somebody says, oh my gosh, this is going to be a financial catastrophe for public education, the truth is that is not true. And the truth is most of the funding in our public schools in Jefferson County is fixed based on property tax assessments and occupational tax, which continue to rise every year, by the way.
Let me build off that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Please.
Your points on Jefferson County are excellent, but let's just zoom out and talk about the state of Kentucky itself. In particular, we've been talking a lot about school choice from a child's perspective, but I don't think enough is being said about the benefit of school choice from a teacher's perspective. And so what I mean by that is, if you look at the state averages on spending for education, it's about $18,500 per child in the state of Kentucky. And then the average classroom size is over 23 per child.
Okay.
It's using state data, which means if you do the math per classroom, we're spending $450,000 approximately on educating a classroom. Well, a teacher only makes on average $56,000 in the state of Kentucky. So there's a huge gap between what's being spent in the classroom and how much a teacher is being paid. So one question is, first of all, where's all that money going? But second of all, imagine you're a teacher in a more rural district, and your dream is to be a high school teacher. But let's say you and administration don't get along all that great. And I've seen that in my wife's own experience as a teacher. A great principal can make or break a school. So what happens if the only employment option in your county is the public school system? Well, with school choice now, not only is there choice for kids, but there's also choice for teachers to, if they want to be entrepreneurial and start their own school, to innovate, come up with new ideas, meet a need that's not being filled, they can do that. And if you do the math, it doesn't take much. If a teacher had 10 kids in the classroom and you took, $10,000 per kid, for example, just using easy numbers here, you could conceive of teachers doing quite well financially. And frankly, that's what our goal is to reward great teachers for their great work.
Yep.
Man, this is fascinating stuff, guys. All right. So, Thomas, you were talking about Florida. What other states have enacted a school choice program that you can show some impact and some data from that shows that this is the right move for Kentucky?
I'll say, first of all, it's accelerating a lot, school choice. So Florida has the biggest program, the longest active program, so there's a lot to glean from Florida's experience. That being said, we can also just look at our neighbors for success. And I think Indiana, just right across the river from us, is a great example. In Indiana, you can go, for example, to Holy Family Catholic School in New Albany, and your program there will cover 99% of your tuition. There's a little bit of variation depending on which district you reside in. That depends how much funding you get. But in general, up to 99% of your funding to cover the tuition costs to go to Holy Family Catholic School, that's an amazing opportunity for families. It's transformative. And those are the kind of success stories we want to see across the river in our hometown, in our home state, so more kids can find that school that's best for them.
Yeah, listen, education, really successful education is being at the right school and being part of a community that works best for you. Not somebody else, but for you. And look, Catholic schools, not to brag, but that the community around a Catholic school is the bigger driver than anything else. It is,
for sure.
The community.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, Thomas, we've hit on a litany of things here, but if I were just to ask you very simply, why should voters approve Amendment 2, what would your answer be?
At the end of the day, the question ultimately is, who should have the strongest voice in guiding your child's education? Should it be the parents or should it be a bureaucrat? It's that simple. And really, I would boil it down to kind of 3 words. 1, power. 2, accountability. And 3, freedom. So 1, this amendment is about putting power back in the hands of parents to guide their children's education.
Right.
As a result, what you're going to do is you're going to create the best form of accountability that exists, which is if you as a parent are not happy with your child's current school, you now have the power to hold that school accountable and go somewhere else. Because as we all saw in recent years, that didn't exist.
That's a great point.
But if you can vote with your feet and vote with your wallet, now that's real accountability.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of waiting for some bureaucratic process to someday fix things.
Yeah.
But then ultimately freedom. I mean, it's not just freedom for kids like we talked about, freedom for teachers as well.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what this is all about, is creating educational freedom throughout the Commonwealth.
So, Rich, if Amendment 2 were to pass and the Kentucky legislature establishes a school choice program across the state, how does that impact Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Louisville?
I think potentially it's a big impact. I mean, we're sort of part of the growth in Catholic schools today. Example, this fall, it'll be the 4th year in a row that Catholic school enrollments are growing across the Archdiocese of Louisville. That isn't happening in a lot of other places, but it's happening here. So our schools, notwithstanding the legislative issue, our schools are doing well. They're growing. They're not declining. That's a good thing. I would tell you this, if there's a school choice program similar to Ohio, similar to Indiana, I think you would have sort of a similar phenomenon that you had 50 years ago when they did forced busing here in Jefferson County, where there was a sort of an onslaught
Right.
of people that wanted to go to either a Catholic school or a private school, because all of a sudden, to Thomas's point, school choice liberates a family to do so.
Yeah.
You know, people, you could talk about, gosh, I wish my kid would go to this school or that school, but if you can't make it work for them, it's never going to happen.
Right.
And now you've got a chance to say, gosh, you know, we got a chance to go to St. Gabriel or wherever you're talking about going, and that's a reality for your family, not only next year, but throughout their journey, throughout their high school journey, potentially.
Sure.
That doesn't really exist today. So I think for Catholic schools, the one thing we have to think about if it passes is, what do we want to look like in the future? Because all of a sudden the world changed and it's different. And I think the demand's higher. I think you run into capacity issues in certain parts of our city. I think there's even an opportunity to create a Catholic school where there isn't one now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of neighborhoods, pockets of neighborhoods in Louisville that over the years lost their Catholic school, mostly around economics,
right.
mostly around enrollments, mostly around changes in neighborhoods and the like, that you have to re-examine to say, okay, the rules are different.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense, for example, in Germantown, okay, which has kind of revitalized itself over the last 15 or 20 years? A lot of young families. There's not a Catholic school in Germantown.
That's right.
Would it make sense for one to be there? So those are the kinds of questions that I think, again, if it passes, there's a lot of questions around our faith and around our church and around our schools that we weren't really talking about before.
I think
It's
beyond
exciting.
just geographic impact, how it may lead to changes in where schools could potentially be built in certain parts of the city, but also just certain types of students that would be able to be attracted. So what I mean by that is, in my own head, my oldest goes to school at Immaculata Classical Academy. That's a school that is designed for the whole family, and in particular, also really welcomes children with different special needs.
Oh, yeah.
Children in particular who have Down syndrome.
Yep.
That's very expensive to take care of, to help educate children with different special needs, and some schools here around town do that. Holy Trinity Clifton campus does that,
right. Yep.
and you have Immaculata. But I think you would see a real flourishing of private school options for children who have different needs that you really don't have the ability to do as easily in the current state. And that's, for me, one of the big exciting opportunities about school choice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I would tell you this, going back to teachers for a minute, you bring in this new level of funding into an enterprise like Catholic schools, there's more of an ability to compete on the compensation side for our teachers.
Right.
I think everybody knows that Catholic school teachers, by and large, are paid less than their public counterparts.
Yeah,
It's been that
especially
way
in the
for a long
elementary schools,
time.
right?
Yeah, particularly in the elementaries. And I think we as a community have to do something about that. That's an inequity that needs to be addressed at some point. And I think school choice, in part, provides an opportunity to do that, because once you start growing your enrollments, the economics work pretty well for the school itself in terms of capital needs, but they also work pretty well for the teachers.
Right.
So there's an opportunity here to reward our teachers in a better way than we do today. Let's put it that way.
Thomas, how can people educate themselves more about Amendment Number 2?
Yeah, so I think one of the best resources is just EdChoice Kentucky's website, edchoiceky.org. A great starting point to be able to learn more about the constitutional amendment. You can certainly go there, learn more about some of the data, different organizations that exist as well, and they can point you in that direction. There's KentuckyStudents.org as well that will link you to the ballot question itself directly, just to read it with your own eyes. Sometimes it's nice to get rid of the fluff and
That's a good point.
and the talking points on from both sides, and just read exactly what the amendment says itself and form your own opinion. I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, it's a great starting point. Well, Thomas, this is it. The big vote is coming on Tuesday, November 5th. What do you think the outcome will be, and how tight will the margin be, in your opinion?
It's going to be tight. I'm aware of several polls that have been done. It is going to be close. I think there are a lot of national forces at play that will affect the outcome. A big question is how many people who vote for president will turn over the ballot and vote for the amendments. So that's a big factor in all of this.
That's interesting.
I have a lot of optimism because I do think this is a trendy issue in the sense that states across the country are expanding their school choice programs. Who doesn't like the idea of having more choices for their children? So we've got a lot of wind to our backs, but lock it out between now and 2 months from now, approximately, and so we just got to make the most of the opportunity.
Yeah, I think to expand a little bit on that, I just think that over the next several weeks, there's going to be a lot of things coming at voters about what school choice is and what it isn't. And I think most of the confusion, the general confusion among voters is, I don't really understand what school choice is, therefore maybe I don't like it. So the more we can do to educate people on what it is and what it isn't, I think the better we're going to be. And I think this podcast is a good example of getting the word out about some of the more common myths around the argument against school choice, and offering some more factual data about what it really is.
I will say, one of the best things we have going for us is the fact that school choice is really historically a bipartisan issue. I mean, Ronald Reagan was a big school choice supporter. You look at people like Joe Lieberman. I know he recently passed away, but he was on the board of the American Federation for Children. You have people like Barack Obama, who were very strong proponents of school choice. I mean, this is truly something that appeals to both sides. And if you look at the polling data, some of the strongest support comes from the minority communities in Louisville, whether it be African American, Hispanic. This is really an issue that appeals to broad swaths of the public.
As it should.
Gentlemen, this was pretty fascinating, and I hope some people got some really great and valuable information out of this. Thomas, thank you so much for your passion, your hard work. You're a hero to so many families who really don't have a choice in the education of their children.
Amen.
And Rich, now it's onward to victory on November 5th.
Absolutely.
And as every Catholic school family in need now knows at the Catholic Education Foundation,
the answer is yes.
Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back again with podcast number 35.
Good job, Thomas. Thank you.
Guys, really enjoyed it.